Welcome to Journalists Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Our guests are Lindsay Weber from The Morning Call, Ian Karbal from the PA Capital Star, and Justin Sweitzer from City and State PA. Welcome, everyone. Justin, we'll start with you. Debate has been revived about school vouchers. Now Governor Shapiro calls them pass scholarships. And would you just refresh us on the concept?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of names tossed around for this idea. You know, it's essentially a concept where lawmakers, and the governor in some cases has advocated for this policy as well. And it's a policy that would use taxpayer dollars to allow students at low-performing public schools to attend private schools. And so this has been, kind of a two-year debate going on now. These vouchers, which are, sometimes referred to as lifeline scholarships or pass scholarships.
That's what the governor's calling them now.
Right. And that's the most recent iteration, I think, was, when they tried to pass this last year, they were pass scholarships. But, regardless of the name, the concept is, essentially providing scholarships to students to attend different schools. And this is something that, Republicans and conservatives are really pushing. It's a school choice measure. They think it can help get students in low-performing schools to better facilities and better institutions. But Democrats are, by and large, concerned about this proposal. They think if we're going to invest funding into education, that it should be put toward public schools, particularly in light of a Commonwealth Court decision on school funding. So there's a lot of pieces around this, but the premise is that it's a tool that Republicans and the governor have supported that would drive scholarships to students in low-performing public schools.
Now, Ian, consider that school vouchers are being called pass scholarships by the governor. So let's talk about the nomenclature. Why make that change? Sometimes it can make it difficult for the public to just keep track about what's being discussed.
Honestly, I wish I knew a hard answer to that question. I'm going to guess that it's just a refresh, a rebrand, just, if something didn't work last year, try it again.
Well, Ian, consider this. How does the governor propose to get funding for school vouchers or pass scholarships? So that seems to have been the core of the debate in the past.
Yeah, so this is what is actually really interesting about this proposal in Pennsylvania, as opposed to in other states where school voucher programs have been a big fight. The thing I think that sets this apart, and that I think has allowed some very thin amount of Democratic support, including from the governor or from a couple of lawmakers in Philadelphia area, is that I think typically when people think of a school voucher program, they think of something that would, take money directly from a public school, which is funded, in part by attendance. So if a student is in that school and, they were to go to a private school, it would take the money away. Now, Pennsylvania's program that's being proposed is quite different from that. At least it's being said that it will not affect the funding of a public school, of a low-performing public school, even if a student were to attend a private school instead.
Justin, you said the debate over vouchers has been going on for a couple of years. So review, if you would, what happened about a year ago. This flared up and then suddenly it was extinguished and disappeared. What happened to last year's vouchers plan?
Yeah, so when the Senate came around to, passing some budget-related bills, they also advanced this scholarship proposal, and they passed the plan. They left. They said it's the House's turn, and the House waffled on it a bit. They were concerned over the voucher language, and it ultimately led to a bit of a standoff, between Republicans and Democrats. And the scholarship language, the voucher language, and the money ultimately didn't make it into the budget proposal. And so that's something the governor and Republicans, I imagine, aren't going to want to replicate this year. They're going to want to secure that funding. As to how they get to that point, I think that's kind of a big question mark looming over budget negotiations right now. Is that funding and language going to be in there, or is it not going to be? And I think we've seen Senate Republicans in particular, who control the chamber, look to assert some of their priorities in recent weeks. So I think as we get closer to June 30th, we might see them begin to bang the drum on this a little bit harder.
So as far as you know, have any tweaks been made to this year's plan that would make it more palatable to lawmakers than whatever was proposed last year?
I don't think I've seen anything at this point, but I think we're going to have to wait and see there.
Now, the funding method aside, again, I was saying that seemed to be the core of the debate here amongst lawmakers. Is there a consensus, and Ian, I'll put this to you, is there a consensus among lawmakers that students ought to get vouchers anyway, again, attempting to put aside any funding dispute?
I have not seen anything like a consensus. I mean, I think there is a consensus in the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party is almost entirely against it, again, with a couple of exceptions there.
What's your take, Ian, on the likelihood of school vouchers flaring up during negotiations for the final state budget?
Oh, I mean, I think it will almost certainly become an issue. Where that will wind up and whether or not vouchers will end up in the budget, I wouldn't want to make a guess there, but I'm sure it will come up.
Lindsay, let's get you involved and turn our attention to federal student loan debt forgiveness. I understand you covered an event in Allentown, and that topic came up. And what's emanating from the White House at this point on this subject?
That's right. So we in Allentown on Monday had U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona come in for a visit. So he sat down at a round table with a group of Allentown and Bethlehem teachers to discuss federal student loan relief. And specifically, the focus of this event was on public service loan forgiveness. So that's something that people who work for any kind of government or certain nonprofit agencies are eligible for. After 10 years of debt payments, you can become eligible to have the rest of your loans forgiven. And so that was the focus of that message. We had teachers sharing their personal stories of what having their loans forgiven really meant to them, financially and otherwise.
Lindsay, review for us what happened to Joe Biden's efforts to cancel student debt last summer. If you remember, that was all over the news.
That's right. So off the top of my head, there was a figure in the hundreds of billions that Biden was looking to cancel, and the Supreme Court actually struck that down in a decision. And so my understanding right now is that his administration is not giving up on student loan forgiveness, but instead they are kind of targeting specific groups of people for loan forgiveness instead of a more general program. And one of those is the public service loan forgiveness. I know another is his administration is looking at canceling loans for people who attended for-profit colleges that, didn't have the career outcomes that were promised by those for-profit colleges. There was another, but it escapes me. But the message is that loan forgiveness is continuing, but in a more kind of focused way instead of more generally.
So, Lindsay, I want to make sure I understand. There are programs in effect right now that are canceling some student debt, right?
That's right. And so the focus of this one was for public service loan forgiveness. That's a program that has existed since, I think, 2007, and that passed in a bipartisan fashion at the time. And my understanding is that the Biden administration is trying to expand that program so that people who work in public service and have made, I think, 10 years worth of loan payments will automatically have those loans forgiven instead of having to actually apply, which can sometimes be a difficult, arduous, bureaucratic process.
And on the average, Lindsay, can you say about how much debt can an eligible student expect to be canceled, again, under current rules?
Right. So I think that it just depends. With this specific program, if you have 10 years of payments in, you will have the rest of it forgiven. But then I know that he's looking at specific programs to cancel up to $20,000 worth of debt for people who attended certain types of colleges and people in those. But in terms of figures for the public service loan forgiveness, my understanding is that as long as you've made those 10 years worth of payments, the rest is forgiven, no matter how much it is.
Justin, let's go back to you. I understand that Senate Appropriations Chairman Scott Martin was the guest at the PA Press Club recently, and several topics came up, and among them was reducing the personal income tax. What's the plan in his chamber?
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania Senate recently passed a multi-part tax cut proposal. It would cut the personal income tax down from its current rate of 3.07. It would also eliminate a tax on gross receipts of electric energy sales. And there was a tax credit proposal, I believe, for EMTs in there as well. But essentially the tax cuts are the two big pieces in there.
Sure.
And
so the current rate, like you said, is 3.07%, and then I understand he wants to reduce it to 2.8%, and that amounts to 0.3%. I wonder just how substantial is that?
Right. I mean, I think it's worth noting too, this is coming in the context of an election year, both for the General Assembly and for the presidency.
So on the surface, a tax cut sounds good.
It sounds very good, and I think you have to look at this in the context also of Pennsylvania's ongoing structural budget deficit. We've heard a lot about that when talking about the governor's proposal. So when we're looking at reducing state income, state revenues, whether that will ultimately be a realistic proposal, we'll have to see. But I think it was an example of Senate Republicans, kind of drawing a line. In the sand with budget negotiations and saying, hey, this is what we want to do. We have some reserves while we're facing this, budgetary problem moving forward. Martin's argument was we should provide some relief to Pennsylvania taxpayers. And so that's kind of the argument that I think Senate Republicans are looking to hammer home as budget negotiations move forward.
And Senate Republicans are in the majority there.
Correct.
So let's consider the Democrats in the House. Any reaction yet from them?
We haven't gotten any movement on this proposal. House Republicans have pushed their counterparts, their Democratic counterparts in the House, to call this bill up for a vote. We haven't gotten one yet. So a bit of pre-budget deadline posturing going on, and I'm intrigued that when we see both sides pushing pieces of their agenda in the lead up to the budget, what pieces are going to be in there. When the ink dries on all the pages. So, what's going to be in there? Are we going to see tax cuts? I don't know.
Now, when Senator Scott Martin was a guest at the PA Press Club, he also brought up the subject of RGGI, which is sometimes called RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. This is a plan that is currently tied up in court, and he has an opinion on that. First, tell us as simply as you can what RGGI is.
Yeah, so RGGI, also known as RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, essentially a multi-state consortium seeking to limit carbon emissions from the power sector. So Governor Tom Wolf, kickstarted this process back in 2019. It's been tied up in the courts over, whether he had the authority to do this. And Governor Shapiro has outlined a plan of his own to regulate carbon emissions a little bit differently, but in a similar manner, while also improving renewable energy goals. So energy is a space where both sides are also kind of jockeying for positioning and looking to move the state in two different directions.
So if power plants exceed a certain limit in their emissions, they have to pay for those emissions, right?
Correct. Yep.
So what did Martin say?
Well, Martin and Senate Republicans have been pretty resolute in that they don't want this plan to move forward. They think, the governor should pull his appeal of the Commonwealth Court decision that struck down the RGGI proposal. The governor is appealing that, and in a sense, looking to protect executive power through that appeal. So it's a bit of a confusing situation when you get all into the minutia, but at its core, Republicans think this will be bad for the state's energy sector, and think the governor should essentially give up on this idea.
Lindsay, let's get you involved again. I understand U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson campaigned for some candidates here in Pennsylvania to give them a boost in November's election. Who did Speaker Johnson meet with, Lindsay?
That's right. So my understanding is Speaker Johnson made a couple of different stops in the Pennsylvania area earlier this week, and the one that was open to the press was, again, in Allentown at the Citronia ambulance headquarters, and that was with Ryan McKenzie, who is a state representative in this area running for Congress in the 7th Congressional District. He's looking to challenge incumbent Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild for that seat.
And Justin, as far as you're concerned, which race would most concern Speaker Johnson here?
Yeah, I mean, we saw Johnson make a couple different stops in PA. Obviously the Lehigh Valley has been a very big target for Republicans nationally as they've looked to unseat Susan Wild over the last several cycles. But Johnson was also focused, up in northeastern PA. He visited the 8th Congressional District to campaign on behalf of Republican Rob Bresnahan. He also campaigned with Brian Fitzpatrick in the state's 1st Congressional District, and he made it out to Western PA to stump on behalf of Rob Mercuri, who's running against Democrat Chris DeLuzio. So, I think Republicans were looking to send Johnson into districts that they see as flippable, and any seat they pick up in Pennsylvania could help them build on their majority in Washington. So I think they're looking to pick up as many seats in the Commonwealth as they can.
Well, Lindsay, let's consider this. Just how much clout does Speaker Johnson have? Because after all, he had to struggle to keep hold of his own gavel, didn't he?
Right, exactly. So, it's hard to say. I mean, I realize that, there were recent headlines that about a wing of the Republican Party that was even looking to oust Speaker Johnson, although it looks like at this point that's not going to go through. But I mean, he's certainly made some headlines recently. I also recognize that he appeared in Manhattan, I think that was last week, to make statements in defense of Donald Trump as he's facing a criminal trial over the hush money accusation.
And Lindsay, on the subject of Donald Trump, let's consider another story that you worked on. And this has to do with the AARP election poll. And they put Trump and Biden side by side. And what was revealed in that poll, Lindsay?
Right. I mean, certainly that it's a competitive race within the margin of error. But my understanding is that Trump is up with older Americans and that they see him as a stronger candidate, especially in terms of when they view handling of the economy. That's something that Trump is certainly favored on over Biden, at least according to this one poll with older Americans.
Let's talk about that a little more, Lindsay, because after all, obviously AARP keeps track of older voters. So just how much influence does that voting bloc have here in Pennsylvania?
Right. It's certainly significant because older Americans are very reliable voters. They tend to show up at every single election, including even in the off year, whereas younger Americans, might vote a little bit more sporadically, maybe in a presidential election, not necessarily in an off year, or maybe not necessarily at all if, they aren't feeling motivated by the candidates, which, considering that both of these candidates poll as being rather unpopular, I can certainly see the appeal towards trying to appeal to more older Americans who reliably show up at the polls.
What did the same poll say, Lindsay, about the race for U.S. Senate? That's Casey and McCormick.
Right. So I think that Casey I can't actually remember the exact margins, but I know that Casey is seen more favorably compared to Biden with older voters, but I can't remember if it...
Lindsay, we have it on the screen
McCormick
right now. Bob Casey has 48%, Dave McCormick just few percent behind at 44%. We have those numbers handy.
Okay, appreciate that so much. So Casey is being seen as, more favorable, at least compared to Biden. And, whether I realize that, and I actually have to give some credit to Penn Capital Star. I read a story this morning about how Casey is also launching a specific initiative towards appealing to older Americans. So, that could see some success with, at least according to this poll.
Justin, let's turn back to you and consider an election audit for the primary. And before we get into the specifics of your story, which to me just seemed pretty unusual, but what is the normal process for making sure the result of an election is correct? Tell us briefly.
Yeah, so, Pennsylvania right now conducts, I believe, two different types of audits after elections. And, one of the ones they've been conducting in recent years is a risk limiting audit that looks to, essentially ensure that the results of a particular race are correct using statistical means. And I'm not going to get into the math because I don't want to butcher that. But, essentially it's a statistical audit and the department picks a race to double check the results and ensure the accuracy of it.
So as far as your story is concerned, that would be the office of, was that treasurer?
Yes, they're for this last primary, they're auditing the Democratic treasurer primary.
Now, what intrigues me is the totally unexpected aspect here of rolling dice, literally rolling a pair of dice to help verify the results of an election. It sounds counterintuitive to me. Try to explain it to me.
It's strange, right? So you see Department of State officials, or volunteers, I should say, rolling out dice and at this press event, and it's kind of a strange political thing that you see. But what the purpose of it is to generate a random seed number, and
this number is many digits long,
right?
And it's the result of many throws of the dice.
Right. I believe it was I think 10 to 20 dice rolls in total. So it was a long number, and this number is put into a software program, which then starts the audit. And it all sounds very complicated, but I think what the Department of State says about it is, this is designed to show people that there are ongoing audits, that there are election security measures, and it, I think is just kind of a quirky way to bring attention to the state's election audits.
Yeah, indeed, it does bring attention. And in the end analysis, I think it leaves us with the question is, how does a system involving rolling dice give us confidence in the outcome of an election?
I would say the thing to note here is, the dice roll and the random seed number, I think doesn't have a huge role in the audit itself beyond just determining that initial random number to select ballots from.
I see.
So
good to know. Okay. Now let's go over to a somewhat more conventional story. And Ian, I'm going to get you involved for this. It has to do with social media safety for kids, and the House approved a bill along these lines. Tell us about it.
So there was a bill put forward by Representative Brian Monroe, who said that he sort of got interested in the subject after hearing from some teenagers in his district. And the goal of that bill is basically to, if anyone under the age of 16 would have to get parental consent to create a social media account in Pennsylvania. Now, that definitely brought raised a lot of eyebrows with First Amendment advocates and tech policy advocates who say that this bill could have some serious unintended consequences, starting with the fact that, if you say, hey, you can't make a social media account if you're under the age of 16, how do you know someone is under the age of 16?
Right.
That could mean, okay, well, we need to get every single person's ID when they make a social media account to prove that they're not 16, because this law says we have to try to verify this. Or it can mean, well, we're going to take your pictures and the ones that you upload, and we're going to use, AI and biometric data to see if we think that you're under 16. So as soon as you start thinking about the enforcement of this bill, you start to see some of the problems that advocates are raising. There are other sections of the bill, though, that even those critics did, like a little bit more. One of which would be not allowing social media companies to mine data of anyone under the age of 18. What data mining means, in this bill at least, would be collecting personal data for the use of selling to third parties or targeting advertisements.
Well, Ian, I understand under the bill, in addition to having parents sign off on a social media account before their child opens it, that it also requires social media companies to make rules about so-called hateful conduct. Give us an example or two of that.
Yeah, so the bill defines hateful conduct. And I mean, first of all, with conduct, when you're talking about a social media platform, what you're effectively talking about is speech. And the bill defines hateful conduct as anything that sort of seeks to vilify, or humiliate, or threaten a group of people based on ethnicity, religion, race, sex, gender. And that has also raised some concerns of harder First Amendment advocates who say, well, the First Amendment does protect, for example, humiliating someone based on their race. And as objectionable as you may find that speech, it is protected by the First Amendment. And so there becomes an issue when you are asking social media companies to create a policy for this that they, may not agree with. There's actually a very similar law that passed in New York, which was blocked by a federal district court, when a far-right social media site, Rumble, and some others sued, saying we don't want to create this policy. You can't force us to do that because of the First Amendment.
Justin, let's get you involved again and talk about something called pre-canvassing. And the House approved a bill along these lines. It allows more time to process mail-in ballots, in short, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this has been a long time ask of county officials and county election administrators. Since the passage of the state's mail-in ballot law in 2019. And, essentially pre-canvassing is, giving county officials more time to, open the ballot envelopes, take them out of the envelopes, sort them.
Remove the contents, flatten it out, and then stop there. You can't count the vote.
Right. They aren't getting formally tabulated or reported or anything like that. So this was always pitched as something that would, allow counties to be better prepared when they do have to report the results, and allow results to get reported sooner. And it's kind of become a political lightning rod over the last couple of years. Republicans have some issues with it. They've also tried to tack on some other election reform measures like voter ID. So it's been pretty contentious, and it's never been expanded beyond I believe the early morning. Right now, counties can pre-canvass beginning the morning of election day, but no sooner.
So Justin, if this becomes law, how soon will we have the election results?
So this would give counties 7 days to do that pre-canvassing. So county officials have said this could significantly speed up that time. Giving them more time to prepare everything so they can report things as soon as the machine results come in on election.
And what happens to this bill next?
Now it awaits a vote in the Senate.
Any clue as to what they'll do there?
No.
Lindsay, let's get you involved for the last subject of our program. It has to do with RFK Jr. We know he's making headlines about the possibility of being on the ballot for the presidential election. Now, in the event he makes the ballot, there's a poll that considers his impact, again, contingent on his making the ballot. Tell us briefly what was found in that poll, Lindsay.
Right. So that poll came out of Muhlenberg College's Institute of Public Opinion, and that found Robert F. Kennedy, if he was able to make it on the ballot in Pennsylvania, capturing, I think, up to the high teens, like 18% of the vote, I want to say. So that's pretty significant. But again, I did speak to an expert at Muhlenberg who told me that the name recognition for him is actually relatively low, and he doesn't expect that were he to make the ballot in Pennsylvania for the margins to be that high. But regardless, he could, siphon quite a few votes from otherwise prospective Biden or Trump voters. And again, that's contingent on him actually making the ballot. He would need to collect 5,000 signatures from Pennsylvania residents who support his candidacy. And I think he would need to do that by August 1st. So we'll know around that time whether or not his name will be on the ballot in Pennsylvania.
Our guests have been Lindsay Weber from the Morning Call, Ian Karbal from the PA Capital Star, and Justin Sweitzer from City and State PA. Thanks very much, everyone. That's it for Journalists Roundtable this week. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.